Thank you, colleagues. It being around 5 o'clock, we will call this meeting to order. And I would like to begin by observing a moment of silence so that council staff and members of the public can quietly reflect on our duty to the community that we are trying to serve. Thank you very much. Members of the public, staff, presenters, and members of council, please be advised that meetings are broadcast and recorded and made available on the internet. Just before we get into the agenda, I just want to make note of the fact that we are returned to council chambers for the first time since March, and that I'll take an opportunity to thank the staff for the renovations that have taken place. I think the public can see that we have screens between the councillors. We have limited capacity for the public, although we are live streaming. And I'd also like to take an opportunity to thank my colleagues on council who have been very creative and very flexible in making sure that we could carry on our responsibilities during the last several months, as well as to all of the staff. Also today, as folks are probably aware, the township office reopened to the public. There are limitations on the number of individuals that can be in the office at any one time, and so we ask for everybody's patience as we go through this process. And today and tonight is the first time we've tried this, so my apologies in advance when we have some sort of technical glitch. If we do, they're inevitable. So I ask for everybody's patience. So it's great to be back, colleagues. It's great to see you. And we'll ask if there is any declaration of pecuniary interest and the general nature thereof. Madam Clerk, there was none noted. We have our minutes from August the 11th, 2020, moved by Jerry, seconded by Donna. Any conversation? No? All those in favor? Those are carried. We have a deputation this evening from Luch, who is going to be talking about our CIP update, and I don't know whether we're ready. He is ready? Okay, so here's where the technology steps in. Let's hope that this all works. So I think what we're going to see first is the presentation come up on the screen, and then it'll be presented to us. We won't see Luch until after the presentation, then he can liven up his camera, and then we can have a conversation, have any questions with him. So Luch, if you can hear me, and I'm hoping that you can, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I could barely hear you, so I would ask council members to speak up, but I could barely hear you when you were doing the introduction. So how are you able to hear me? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, if you keep talking that loud will be good. A little bit louder would be great too.
That's great. Now I can hear you very well. Thank you. Okay, so the purpose of this presentation really is to provide council with an update on where we are with the community improvement plan review and revision. So we started this project, I started working on this project with township staff in late June. And if all goes well, we hope to have the updated CIP before you for adoption in October. So that's 4 months. That's the fastest I've ever done one. And having said that, we've taken all the required steps and done this comprehensively. But you know, there was certainly a sense of urgency to do this, still do it properly, but get it done as quickly as possible. So I'm going to describe for you the methodology that we used. We did also sort of do a bit of an update on the best practices review that we did a couple of years ago, just to see what other municipalities are doing and how that compares to what Selwyn Township is doing. I did a pretty comprehensive quantitative analysis of the results of the CIP program from inception in 2013 to the end of 2019. We identified both short and long-term critical needs to update the CIP, and then went ahead and developed some proposed updates to the incentive programs, which I'll be presenting tonight. Then I'll quickly discuss the next steps and the timing of the next steps, and happy at that point to answer any questions that council might have. Next slide, please. So in terms of methodology, as I mentioned earlier, we did conduct a scope best practices review of similar CIP incentive programs in about 9 or 10 other Ontario municipalities. We reviewed the results of the existing programs in Selwyn Township. As you know, 4 of them have been launched, and looked at the level of uptake and the leverage ratio for those programs. We met twice with the EDBC during the preparation of the proposed updates, and also met twice with township staff, and also consulted with them on an ongoing basis in terms of the updates and how they could be administered, the updated programs and marketed and so on. And then we moved on to sort of identifying critical community improvement needs. And from that, as our launching point there, developed the draft incentive program revisions to address those needs. Next slide, please. In terms of the best practices review, not a lot has changed in the last 2 years, but you know, again, comparing Selwyn Township to other municipalities, your CIP does contain a broad range of incentive program types. The funding amounts, the maximum grant amounts for each of the programs in your CIP are competitive, if not more than competitive, with other best practice municipalities. The landscape improvement grant and the ground signage improvement grant are innovative in that few other municipalities actually offer dedicated programs for these types of improvements. They either include these types of improvements in other programs like facade improvement, for example, or building improvement, or don't include them at all. So that's an innovative aspect of your CIP. And the one thing that we did see is that a number of municipalities are now switching or going away from loans to just grants for programs such as facade improvement or building improvement. And what they found is over time that there are some administrative issues with these loans. Some of them don't get repaid, they're administrative heavy. So municipalities are focusing more of that type of improvement just on grants. Next slide, please. In terms of your CIP and looking at the results, and this is a good slide in terms of an overall, you know, what programs have been utilized, when were they utilized, and of course the ground signage improvement grant wasn't available until 2018. But you can see that you've had almost an even split between the facade improvement grant applications at 44 and the landscape improvement grant applications at 44, with 6 ground signage improvement grant applications since that program was introduced in 2018, and then 6 urban design study grant applications. So 2 things to note here of real importance. One is that you've actually had 100 applications since your CIP was launched back in 2013, with an average of 14 applications per year. So for a municipality your size, with the number of businesses you have, that's a very good uptake. Certainly better than a lot of other municipalities I've seen. And the second thing to note is if you look at the total number of applications, it swings wildly. You know, you got 29 in the first year, 0 in 2016, and then back up to 36 in 2018. So what that says is that, you know, while you do have an average of 14 applications per year, you need to maintain budget flexibility, because in some years you're going to have a very high number, far exceeding that 14, and in some years you're going to have a very low number. So that's an important thing to remember. But overall, this is a very good uptake. Next slide. So if we dive into those 100 applications and say, okay, where are they in the process? You'll see that 88 have been completed. So that means the application has been approved and the works have been done and the grant has been paid. 3 are approved and yet to be finished. 7 are pending, and what that means is that an inquiry has been made, but an application has not yet been submitted. And only 2 of the 100 have been abandoned, and that's where either the applicant abandoned it, for example, the property was sold, or staff said, basically, you haven't fulfilled your obligations within the set period of time, and therefore we're terminating the approval. So to have only 2 out of 100 is excellent. That's a very low application abandonment rate. And to have 88 out of 100 already completed is also very good. These are really, really encouraging numbers. Next slide. So then when we look at the individual programs and look at the total grant amount, so the third column is the amount that the township has contributed. Now this will be just for the 88 completed applications, and then the total private sector contribution, the total project value, and therefore the leverage ratios. So when you're seeing a leverage ratio of about 2.1 there for the facade improvement grant, that's very good. The landscaping improvement grant at about 1.4, that's what we would expect for that type of grant program. The ground signage improvement grant at 2.5 is even higher than what I would expect. And the urban design study grant, usually those are around 1 or 1.1. So even that's a little higher than what I would expect. So overall, you've got almost a 1.9 times leverage ratio. So that means that the township has contributed almost $314,000 to these programs, and that's leveraged almost $590,000 in private sector investment for a total project value of over $900,000. So, you know, if the pandemic hadn't happened, I would certainly expect that to be over $1 million by the end of 2020, and it may be anyways. Staff might be able to provide a little bit more light on that. But again, these are really impressive numbers. The CIP is working, it's effective, it's producing a good leverage ratio. You're getting a variety of projects, as you'll see in the next slide, smaller projects, some larger projects. So overall, you know, I'm happy to see this result, and I trust council is happy to see this result. Next slide. So most of the facade improvement projects were modest in scope. These included things like facade cleaning, painting, repair, signage, awnings, those types of things. But almost 1 in 5 or 8 of the 36 completed projects were bigger in scale. And for those bigger scale projects, the average project value was actually $65,618, and the most expensive was almost $130,000. So you could look at that and say, well, these projects might have proceeded without the grant, and that's probably true. However, the grant, and staff has indicated this, that the grant likely helped ensure the projects were more comprehensive, higher quality in terms of design and construction materials, and better adhered to the township CIP design guidelines. So while we're certainly trying to make sure that the incentives trigger projects that wouldn't otherwise happen, in the 20 or 25% of projects that probably would have happened, we're getting a better result, a higher quality result. So that's important to remember also. Next slide. Now, in terms of the critical needs that we identified, and this is based again on the meetings and comments with the EDBC and township staff, there was interest in revising the 50-50 cost sharing formula so the township pays a larger share of the project value. Now, again, if we do that as recommended, you will be one of the few municipalities that does that, and you'll be leading edge and innovative there. In so doing, however, the message from the EDBC and staff was that the incentive programs should focus on projects that would not otherwise take place primarily. The quantum of the grant, or the total grant as a percentage of the total project value, is just as important as the maximum grant amount. So for smaller projects, it's important to try and increase that percentage that the township will be contributing. And applicants should be encouraged to undertake projects in a single phase or at most 2 phases rather than multiple phases. And again, if you increase that 50-50 cost sharing formula, that will help to accomplish that goal. The other message was we want to incent as many projects as possible, as soon as possible, to try and help recover from COVID. And for budgetary reasons, the revised cost sharing formula should be temporary. So we want to try and get projects going. And what we've sort of come up with is that it would be temporary to the end of 2022 to coincide with the current term of council. And also, in addition to sort of revising that cost sharing formula until the end of 2022, there was also an interest in a temporary program to help applicants pay for building and property improvements related to preventing and reducing the transmission of the COVID-19 virus, or a COVID-19 pilot program. So I was tasked with what can we do? And we know that there's a temporary program right now, which ended at the end of August. What can we do within the legislated parameters of Section 28 of the Planning Act when it comes to community improvement plans, and how can we do it? So that's what sort of I had to come up with in consultation with staff. Next slide. So to address those 2 concerns, one more a little longer term in terms of the cost sharing formula, the other one more immediate, in terms of the COVID-19 related costs. So the first revision to the incentive programs that we're proposing is to revise the current 50% township, 50% applicant cost sharing formula for the programs where a cost sharing formula applies to 70% township, 30% applicant, but there will be no change in the maximum grant amounts. So that would apply to the Urban Design Study Grant Program, Landscape Improvement Grant, Facade Improvement Grant, Ground Signage Improvement Grant, and the Building Improvement Grant, which is currently inactive. Now, we're not recommending that the Building Improvement Grant be launched. We're just recommending that a pilot of it, which would be the COVID-19 pilot, which I will be describing in a second, be launched. And then the cost sharing formula at 70-30 would revert back to 50-50 on January 1st, 2023. So only complete applications received by the township on or before December 31st, 2022 will be eligible for the 70%, 30% cost sharing formula. And this fact would be made known to all applicants. It would be heavily marketed, again, to try and get that trigger effect to get as many applications as we can in the next just over 2 years under the new cost sharing formula. Next slide, please. Now, in terms of the second major update, what we're recommending is introducing and activating what's called a COVID-19 pilot grant program. And this would be a component of the Building Improvement Grant Program and the only component that would be launched under the new CIP. So this program would be designed for the purpose of preventing or reducing the transmission of the COVID-19 virus by providing funding, again, at the 70-30 cost sharing formula for physical improvements to buildings and property for the sole purpose, the specific purpose of preventing or reducing the transmission of the COVID-19 virus. And we'll get into what those eligible costs are in a moment. But again, the way the program would operate is just the same as the Building Improvement Grant. There's a maximum of $10,000. It would be the revised 70% township, 30% applicant cost sharing formula. It would run until December 31st, 2022. However, the program could be extended by council past that date, and that should not be 2022, it should be 2022, if council deems it necessary to do so. And we can do that without a formal amendment to the community improvement plan. So there's some flexibility for whatever comes in terms of, again, does this pandemic sort of resurface this year, next year? There's an opportunity to address it through this program. So what are the eligible costs? Next slide. This is the preliminary list we came up with. And I'll preface this by saying that things, soft costs, things like hand sanitizer, things like PPE, like masks, those sorts of things, we cannot make those eligible costs under Section 28 of the Planning Act in a community improvement plan. We're somewhat limited, but it has to be physical building and property improvements, okay? And those improvements have to relate for the COVID-19 pilot to, again, reducing or preventing the transmission of COVID-19. So here is what we came up with. Building doorway and entrance modifications, video doorbells, COVID-specific signage, both on the interior and the exterior of the building or even on the property itself, permanent or temporary impermeable physical dividers. So that would include things such as plexiglass, sanitation stations themselves, because they are fixed to an interior part of the building, but it wouldn't include the hand sanitizer, for example. Touchless plumbing fixtures, floor markings, new or modified customer reception counter and display areas, permanent or temporary patio structures, including vegetative and other forms of patio screening, ventilation system upgrades such as separation, purification, air purifiers, foggers, and then more as a catch-all, in case we haven't captured something here, other similar physical building and property improvements specifically required for the purpose, again, of preventing or reducing the transmission of the COVID-19 virus. Now, what we're going to do is, what I'm proposing to do is put these eligible costs in an appendix rather than right in the CIP. And that appendix can then be changed as we gain more knowledge about what other eligible costs might come up. And it can be changed without formally amending the community improvement plan. So that's the beauty of that approach is, you know, if something comes up in 3 months or 6 months that we haven't thought of this list, staff will not have to come back and have another public meeting and do a formal amendment to the CIP. It could be something as simple as a report to council saying we've added the following eligible costs to the appendix, and council signs off on it. Okay, so again, this is a learning process. There's going to be a learning curve here, but I think it does address the sort of ongoing concerns about, providing some funding for these eligible costs. Next slide. So those are the two major proposed updates. In terms of the next steps, as I'd mentioned earlier, we're trying to do this process as quickly as possible and get the revised programs in place as quickly as possible. So assuming council approves the recommendations before you this evening, I would then complete the revisions to the community improvement plan within a week. They'd be circulated to commenting agencies as is required under the Planning Act, including the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. A notice of the statutory public meeting would be issued on September 21st, and the updated plan would be made available to the public at that time. The formal statutory public meeting would take place on October 13th. We have to have at least 20 days between the issuance of the notice and that public meeting. Again, assuming that meeting goes well, the adopting bylaw could be brought back to council on October 27th. And if there are then no appeals over the next 20 days, the CIP would then be approved on November 16th and actually could be brought into effect, including the new programs, by November 17th. That's as quick as it can happen, doing it properly, and that's what we've done. Next slide, please. So the recommendation, my understanding, the recommendation before you this evening would be that this presentation would be received for information, that council would endorse the proposed updates to the incentive programs as outlined in this presentation, and that along with township staff, I would prepare the CIP update, and then staff would circulate the updated CIP to the commenting agencies, and that a statutory public meeting would be held on October 13th, 2020. That concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer any questions council might have about these slides, and we can go back to any of the slides with staff's cooperation to go back to the slides. They're controlling the presentation, and happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Luch. I'm going to ask the Deputy Mayor if she had some comments or questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'd like to say that I'm happy to be back at the council chambers. It's nice to be back. One of the recommendations that council and staff made was to enhance the CIP to help our businesses through COVID. And I appreciate your accelerating from the original dates. The EDBC was very appreciative and in favor of the recommendations that are before us tonight, and I'd like to move them after we've heard any questions or comments from our colleagues. Thank you.
Thank you. Donna?
Yes, through you. I see that the timeline goes to November the 17th, 2020. If business owners incurred these costs in July or August to get their patios or their buildings ready, would they be able to apply for retroactive dollars, or is it new dollars after November the 17th?
Okay, through the mayor to the councilor, my understanding is that the business reopening program, which would cover some of these costs, was taking applications until the end of August. So we're really talking about the period from September 1st to November 17th. And no, they would not be able to retroactively apply for anything that they spent money on if it's an eligible cost between September 1st and November 17th. Now, in discussions with staff, they have indicated that a large number of businesses have taken advantage of the business reopening program. However, that the number of applications tailed off as the program sunsetted at the end of August. And if you look at the eligible costs, these are the types of things that most of them you'd have to go out and get a couple of quotes for. And they're not the types of things that you can put in place right away. There's some planning involved and so on. So we don't anticipate that. And again, this was a discussion that I had with staff and the EDBC in terms of how quickly can we make this happen. We had this discussion about that intervening period, we're not anticipating a huge number of applicants spending money on these things necessarily during that period. However, it's very important, and I've discussed this with staff, to sort of get the word out after this update meeting that if you are considering these things, you might want to hold off till November 17th if you can. Go out, get your cost estimates, line it all up, talk with staff about it. But in terms of submitting the formal application, it would come in after November 17th. In fact, the reason that they cannot spend the money before then is that they basically, you'd be approving an application for a program that wasn't in place for monies that were spent on that program before the program was in place. And that's a contravention of the municipal act. That's pretty straightforward. That's bonusing.
Thank you, Luch. Donnie, you had a follow-up?
One other one, yes. This goes back to the EDBC and township staff comments, and the first little bullet says incentive programs should focus on projects that would not otherwise take place. And I was just wondering how that would be determined.
I've been doing this for 20 years, and there's something called a but-for test. So but for the incentive, would the project have happened? I've looked at all the research from the States, from Canada. Nobody has come up with a solid, what we'll call but-for test. However, what we're seeing in the numbers in terms of the uptake was, we only saw 8 of those 88 projects or so where they actually spent more than the maximum grant in terms of the 50-50 cost sharing formula. By switching to the 70-30, what we think is going to happen is we're going to trigger more of those projects that wouldn't have otherwise happened, because now instead of having to have, say, if they're doing a $10,000 project, instead of them having to have 5,000, they only need to have 3,000. Okay, so I think it's going to trigger more of the smaller and medium-sized projects, but keeping the maximum grant amount means you're not going to be over bonusing the large projects. You're going to be providing them with some funding to do a better project, but really the focus of that 70-30 change is on the smaller to medium-sized projects. So we tried to listen to that, and that's the way we're kind of trying to accomplish that goal.
Okay, thank you. I'm satisfied with that answer.
Thank you, Donna. Anita?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the presentation. The numbers are very impressive of the grant money put out versus the actual value, so that looks really good. I have a couple of questions. One is, how much money is still left in the budget for the CIP program in the township? And the second question would be, I thought I understood that the federal government was handing out some new money, and could we qualify for any of that money to be used towards the COVID-19 pilot grant program?
I'm going to direct that to the CAO in terms of the budget. Now, we have an existing budget, and then we also added to that budget as part of the COVID-19 strategy, right?
Yeah, for sure. We have an existing budget. I can't recall the number that we added as part of the recovery program, but certainly we do have a reserve as well. So if we found that the uptake for this program was greater than what we had in the budget, then certainly council can provide direction to go to that reserve and provide more funding for the program. Does that answer your question? Okay.
Any other comments? Not seeing any. I'll just make a couple of myself. First of all, Luch, to thank you for your work on this. I know that you've done it very quickly, and we're appreciative of it. One of the things that the committee, the Economic Business Development Committee, pointed out was the need to try to put this in place as quickly as possible. It was also great to see the uptake of the program to date. Almost 100 businesses have taken advantage of it. It's triggered almost $900,000 of investment in our community. That is a very substantive amount. I should make note as well of I think if staff will help me here, I think there was close to 100 businesses on our initial, our $2,500 program. Do we have the exact number?
I believe it's 108 or 109.
Okay, So between the two programs, we've assisted over 200 businesses. There could be some duplication, but that's over 200 businesses that have been provided assistance. I'm very supportive of the movement to the 70/30. I think that will, in fact, trigger projects that might not otherwise have happened. And the COVID recovery pilot makes a lot of sense. In essence, our initial program allowed people to get open. This program will allow people to stay open and to adapt to what I suspect will be a new operating reality for some time to come. So I'm very supportive of this, and I believe the Deputy Mayor would like to make a motion.
Sorry, I move the recommendation that is before us tonight.
And I think Councillor Ballantyne is going to second that. That's the motion which appears on slide 14. Any other discussion? Not seeing any. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you, colleagues. Thank you, Luch. We very much appreciate all of the work and effort, and particularly the speed at which you're doing this.
Thank you very much. And if I can just note that you can't achieve results like this without a supportive council, without staff properly administering and marketing the program. So it's obvious to me that your staff are doing a really good job with these programs since they were launched in 2013.
Thank you very much, and thank you to the staff. We will now move on to questions. I don't believe there was any submitted, and there are no members of the public in the audience, so we will move right on to, we have no municipal officers and staff reports for direction, but there are a number of items in the consent agenda. I'll ask anybody if they want any of those items pulled. Yes, 5A. Any others? Donna? Yep. 7.1 and 7.9. Okay, any others? 6.1, I think, Donna, you want it? It's part of the consent agenda. Okay. So I have, so far I have 5A, 6.1, 6.2, 7.1, 7.9. And I have a question about 5B, and I have questions on 6.3, that's the correspondence bullets 3, 4, and 5. So we'll just go through these in order. 5A, which is the development charges.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to make a comment. I know we've seen this schedule in the past as well, but I think it's really important for people. We often hear complaints about, development charges, how much cost is to do development throughout the township. But the way it's broken down, for instance, fire services, library services, all these different numbers. I know the overall number is really high, but to have them broken down like that, I think people really need to understand that, they're not just paying, 3,100 or 9,600 or 12,000 or whatever, all those development charges are very carefully identified as to where the costs are coming from. So I just think it's really important that the public take the time to read this, and so they don't have to complain.
Okay, thank you. Item 5B, which is, I think, Rob's, that's the hiring of our new building inspector. So congratulations on getting that done. That was a pretty expeditious process. I wonder if at some point in time at a future meeting, you can have an opportunity to introduce our new employee and give council a chance to meet them.
Yeah, if council wishes us to do that, we could certainly have her attend one meeting in the not too distant future. Yeah.
Sure, that would be great. And again, well done in getting that completed quickly. Our next item is 6.1. Donna.
Thank you very much. We got two pieces of paper going here. So staff has provided a recommendation following a letter from the Save Pigeon Lake people. Actually, it was written by Larry Wood. And with council's indulgence, I would just like to add to that recommendation, and I'll read what I would like added, and then we could have discussion if necessary. So after concerns being experienced in this area, so at the very end of the staff recommendation, I would like to add, and whereas MP Miriam Monsef promised at a public meeting in November 2018 that a solution or a way forward would be found within a 3-month period in order to solve the issue of planting and harvesting wild rice in federal waters. And whereas no solution or compromise has been found to date, the Township of Selwyn is requesting a letter from Minister Monsef outlining her position as our federal representative, as well as the position of the federal government in managing a solution or at least a fair compromise between the two parties.
Comments, colleagues? Okay, so you're moving that as an
If you
amendment to the
want-
motion?
Yes.
Okay, and Jerry will second that. Okay, so we're gonna, so that's, we have a mover and a second to that amendment. Should we vote on that separately then from the rest of the consent agenda? Just get that off the table? Okay,
And could we have a recorded vote for that? Because it's pretty important to a lot of our residents.
sure. Madam Clerk?
Thank you. Counselor Ballantyne,
Yes.
Counselor Heron,
Yes.
Counselor Locke,
Yes.
Mayor Mitchell,
Yes.
Deputy Mayor Senes.
Yes.
Motion is carried.
Okay, so we'll continue with the, so that's dealt with. So when we approve the rest of the consent agenda, it's everything in addition to that. Okay, item 6B, I think, was next.
Number
Oh, no,
2,
6.2, Highway 28 in Clear Lake. Is that, okay,
that's me as well. Because I am on the Police Services Board, I sent an email to Staff Sergeant Chris Galeazza on the weekend asking him about the possibility of putting a black cat on a provincial road, a provincial highway, like Highway 28, and he wrote back, no problem, we'll put it up starting this week, running for a week to 10 days. So that could be reported to the people that sent in the letter.
okay. Yes, Harry.
Thank you, through you. I just have a question. Usually any complaints such as what have been sent to us go to the Police Services Board. I'm just curious why this has come directly to council. And given that one of the complainants is on the Police Services Board, I'm a little confused as to what's going on with policy here. And I'm not sure, Donna, if you can answer that question.
I can't answer the question specifically. I did not contact the member of the Police Services Board. My only idea is that we won't be having our next meeting until late October, and he may have thought that it was a serious issue. I would have thought it would have probably been a serious issue all summer, but I don't know. I haven't asked him personally why he did it this way.
Okay, I'll come right back to you because I think Jerry wanted to.
Thank you. Through you to Councilor Ballantyne then. So do you guys have any data to support the excessive speed claim? Or is that just visual data and assumptions being made by the group?
We don't have data for Highway 28 Clear Lake. We have data for about 4 roads that was discussed at our last Police Services Board meeting, and we're actually changing our traffic calming policy so that we can have more official reports on the statistics of the black cat findings.
Okay, so basically, if we talk to the OPP and they said that stretch prior and before the Ultramar, nobody's talked to them to say, hey, listen, we've had, 200 speeding calls there. We've had, 16 accidents. So basically, it's this letter moot, if you will. So I'm not going to support something like this.
Jerry?
My concern is that we're setting precedents by having residents send letters directly to council. That's really the job of the Police Services Board. And usually what ends up happening is we get some kind of confirmation, as Councillor Heron said, that there is some speeding going on prior to even installing a black cat. And if we start doing this kind of thing, we're going to be bogged down with these requests coming at us from all over the township in order to get a black cat installed, jumping the line of other people who are going through the proper process. So I'm inclined to agree with Councillor Heron.
So what you're suggesting is that rather than the correspondence going directly to the OPP, that it goes to the Police Services Board? Okay, well, I'm open to Donna.
So I'm wondering then, should we prepare a letter to Staff Sergeant Galeazza and tell him, because the proper, when I sent my email, I questioned him. I wondered why the Police Services Board was circumvented. He didn't know, but he did say that he could put it up, so, and would put it up. So I think we need to give him direction pretty quickly if we don't want that to happen.
Jerry?
Thank you. Through you. I've got people who live in the township who have little kids who are about to get hit, let alone a provincial highway. I'd rather see the resource of the black cat being used for residential areas where there's a greater risk of somebody getting smoked based on the complaints we've had and everything like that. Unless they can show us how many accidents were at that intersection of Clear Lake, and I drive it all the time. There is a turning lane there. I'd rather see the black cat be used what it was used for, or what it's designed for, and that's to help save lives in our township, let alone a provincial highway.
I'm not actually supporting this letter. I just thought by sending the email that I would help us out of the situation. I'm not necessarily supporting the process that occurred.
Okay, I'm just going to intervene, colleagues. So I think what the issue is here is that this debate, this discussion belongs with the Police Services Board to have this discussion. That's what I think the general consensus is. The Police Services Board may decide that they do want to to recommend to the OPP they put the black cat out. They may want to recommend that they get some research. They may want to recommend a number of things. I think the point that Councillors Senes and or Deputy Mayor Senes and Councillor Heron have made is the forum for that discussion is the Police Services Board, and that's where we ought to send it. By catching the sense, I think Councillor Ballantyne, you're comfortable with that as well?
Yeah, we just have to stop the process.
Okay, so if what we may want to have a motion that says that we want to forward this to the Police Services Board and that we want to advise the OPP that we've asked this Police Services Board to look at this before any action is taken. That's what you're looking for. So I need a mover and a seconder. Okay, I see Jerry and Anita. Okay, all those in favor? Okay, so that one is also removed from the consent agenda. Okay.
Oh, I just want to follow up. So who's going to do this letter? Is somebody going to contact the OPP and put a stop on this? Because he indicated to me that he could do it this week.
Yeah, that will come from staff.
Yeah, I will contact Chris tomorrow.
Okay.
Okay. So that takes care of 6.1 and 6.2. We are now into the correspondence number 3. I think that was mine, the first bullet or the third bullet. The COVID infrastructure program, which was announced about 30 days ago, 40 days ago. I was just wondering if we have gotten any additional No, we have not got any additional, so obviously we can't apply for anything. The provincial government, when it changed the Trillium program, that was a stream that we would have been eligible for. There was one, what do you call it, intake that closed on the 2nd of September. I'm assuming we did not submit for that. There's another one, I think, that closes on the 1st of December, if I remember correctly.
Yes, I think that's correct. And I do believe that the library board is considering something under that program, but we will be following up on both of those.
Okay. The other one, and I don't know whether Lane's on the line or not. In respect of the Safe Restart money that we received, we were supposed to be getting a template for eligible expenditures if we want additional money, and I'm just wondering if we've received that.
Through you, Mr. Chair, we have not yet received that template or any of the funding at this point in time.
Okay. Thank you, Lane, wherever you are. It's a little bit different to hear a disembodied voice give you a reply. That's very good. Thank you. Okay, so now we go to 7.1. I'm just trying to, yeah, 7.1. That's the accomplishments and, yes, okay, sorry, Donna.
I just have a comment that I thought it was a very efficient.
You mean that one that just came up right now?
Very efficient use of his time. I know we always enjoyed seeing Mr. King come around to our municipality once a year, but it was time consuming and everybody's time is, it seems to be stretched to the limit now. So I thought that was a very good presentation and an excellent use of his time.
Good, thank you. I will pass that on. Sherry and I will both pass that on. And then you had item 9 on the county report?
That's me as well. Down in the settlement area and growth management, that part, Rob, what page is it on? Page 2. I'm sure that this hasn't changed, but I still want to ask the question. They will, at the county level and the municipal hierarchy, will decide where the growth areas are in the municipality, and it probably will not be in the hamlet of Ennismore. It's still the same.
Yeah, so I know that Jeanette has made she's actually on the line, and I think she's certainly reviewed this in detail, and she's updated herself on all of the TAC committee. So maybe we could ask Jeanette to answer the question in a disembodied way as well.
Yeah.
Jeanette, if you can go ahead, please.
Thank you. Yes, so we are reviewing the different areas and we'll make recommendations. Ennismore is identified as a settlement area, so there is a potential for some growth. Of course, most of the growth will be directed to areas within the county that are serviced, but it is identified already as a settlement area, so there will be some growth attributed to it.
Donna?
Through you to Jeanette. Hello.
Hello.
We would have to, if we did extra growth in Ennismore, I think we would have to expand the boundary of the hamlet. So is that still maybe a possibility?
So the growth management strategy has to be completed, and that was just released from the province late last month. So that will have to be completed through the county, and that will provide what the growth allocation will be. And then it'll be determined which municipalities should have that growth allocated to it. And then I'll also determine whether or not there are areas that should be expanded or areas that will stay as is.
No. Okay. So would you put Ennismore on the table because we do have a developer that's interested in building some houses there? Would that be put on the table so that this committee would know that?
Yeah, no, for sure. It already is identified as a settlement area. So it's one that would, if growth could be allocated to areas that are outside of those that are serviced, it would be one of the ones looked at for sure.
So that it will go on the table to be discussed.
Yeah, it is.
Okay.
Thank you, Donna. I think that covered all of the consent items. Didn't miss anything? Good. So we need a motion to accept all the other consent items other than the two we had already accepted. Jerry and Anita, all those in favor? The consent items are carried. There are no petitions, and we'll move to portfolio updates. Donna?
You always get to me so fast.
Sorry.
Okay. So the link, I asked Angie for an update, and she told me today that the township has applied to the MTO to extend the grant program from March 31st, or, oh yes, the ending was to be March 31st, 2023, asking to extend it to March 31st, 2025. And they're hopeful to start the service in the spring of 2021. And that extension of 2 years would allow us to build our ridership and our confidence in the program, because it was to start last May and we obviously could not do it. So it's just hanging there. So hopefully they'll give permission to extend it for 2 years. Okay, that's the link. And the Wild Rice Working Group and the committee from Save Pigeon Lake do have a meeting tomorrow with Jewel Cunningham and forget the other gentleman's name. You know him?
Andrew, I forget his last name, but it's Andrew's his
Campbell?
first name. Campbell, that's right. Thank you.
Yeah, to discuss the issue further. They have been talking and they've had site visits, but just recently, one of the shoreline residents were issued a fine from Trent 7 or Parks Canada, it's probably Trent 7, for cutting some of the rice around their dock. So there's just a few more things that need to be sorted out. It didn't seem fair that they couldn't at least clear around their dock. So I think that precipitated the need for an extra meeting. And they're very pleased that the meeting was accepted from Parks Canada, Trent Severn, very quickly. So they said it was the quickest meeting that was ever set up yet in all 11 years. So hopefully that's positive. And Andy and myself will be on the phone to listen, and we'll be able to ask a question or make a comment at the end, depending on how things go and what we feel that we want to add. I got my notes very mixed up here, I'm sorry. The Police Services Board. So we have had the black cat out on the 7th line, Birch Island Road, Clonakilty, Edenderry. And they grade them as medium, low, whatever. And the one that was of most concern was Clonakilty, going up the hill from coming off Gifford onto Clonakilty, coming on to Gifford from Clonakilty, because it just seems like a total speedway. So we did send a letter to the Public Works asking if they would look at that intersection, which is Arnott, Gifford, and Clonakilty, to see if it's viable to have a three-way stop there. Some members thought there was already a stop from Arnett going on to either of those roads. So then it would just make it a stop the two other ways, because it really is just a curve and they accelerate quickly going both ways. So obviously, I don't know what has happened with that request. We had our meeting last week, I think. And we are updating, like I said earlier, our traffic and speed awareness policy, and it'll be reviewed the next meeting, because we want to be sure that when we get these black cat statistics, there is documentation and follow-up, so that there aren't any legal issues for somebody to come back and say, you know, you found these number of speedings, what have you done about it? So we want to make sure that that's all tied up and everybody knows exactly the way forward. Because right now we just have the statistics and just been left at that. So we need to make that a little more comprehensive. And then library, I think I'm the busiest one here. We just had our first face-to-face meeting today, this morning, to continue to promote our strategic plan. And we did the section where we were putting our action items down so that we had all our indicators, and then we wanted to do 4 or 5 action items on how we would accomplish each of those. So we were to work on it for 2 hours, and we worked on it for nearly 3, and we did finish it, so that was good. And then we're having on September 18th, which is next week, a pre-budget meeting, because we know we're going to be facing a deficit in our budget because of the lack of the ability to fundraise. So we just wanted to have a little discussion with Lane to be sure that before we go to the official budget meeting, we know exactly where we stand. I think that's everything.
Thank you, Donna. Sherry.
Thank you, through you. So we've already heard from Angie that 108 businesses have taken advantage of the business recovery program, and they have until September the 30th to submit their claims. And all of the business owners have been very appreciative of this particular grant. Purchases have included PPE, sanitizer, patio construction, expansion of online presence, etc. Peterborough Excellence Awards are coming up. They're virtual this year on October the 21st. The show is free, and we have some local business, some of our Selwyn businesses that are up for an award. Kitchen Pharmacy is a finalist in the local focus. These are meals to go. The business is out of Lakefield, and it's farm to table. We have Angela Jones of Lakeshore Designs is a finalist as Businesswoman of the Year. And New Canadian Entrepreneur of the Year has already been named, Jill and Nick Exton of Canoe and Paddle. Adriana Sullivan from Ennismore is a recipient of a summer company program grant for her pottery business called Cozy Cups. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Jerry?
Public Works, they're doing the brushing right now, the normal stuff to get ahead. They've been very busy trying to get caught up after the COVID thing. But the brushing's starting now, the charring and chipping, they're waiting on some more equipment to free up, and then they can get everything done, hopefully before the freeze. Park and Rec, ICE is going in the 3rd, the 5th of October. Mike's going to have a report at our next meeting outlining what our plans will be. But as of right now, everything, they're just trying to work through it with the rules of your bubble for hockey, if you will. So Mike will have a more detailed, in-depth report next meeting. Other than that, awesome.
Thank you. Anita?
Ruby Smith, Lakeville Lioness Lions. She celebrated her 100th birthday in August, and a certificate was sent to her from the township. So thank you to staff for looking after that. I have had a lot of comments about the streets in Lakeville and how great they are looking. The new top, whatever the asphalt is called or whatever. I think there's still some streets that have to be done, but I've had a lot of comments about how nice the streets are looking, especially compared to the city of Peterborough. I wanted to pass along, I drive to work every day in Peterborough, it's horrible. Anyway, I want to pass along kudos to the library staff, especially Lakeville Library, from an acquaintance of mine. She was actually talking to me about it today. Her mother lives in a retirement home and is visually impaired. So my friend, she phones the library staff. They know who she is right off the bat and are able to provide, I guess, audio books or whatever they're called for this woman's mom. So I just want to pass that along to say how great it is. The library staff know her by name, recognize her voice. Police have received complaints about trucks on Strickland Street with a recommendation for larger no trucks signs. And I would imagine that now that the Strickland Street is being redone, there might be even more complaints coming from Strickland. Staff will be doing follow-up on that. No word yet on what the committees that I'm on, Accessibility Advisory Committee and the Heritage Committee, when we're going to be starting to meet again. So I have absolutely nothing to report in that direction. And I just have a question. When is the council communicator expected to be released?
Madam Clerk?
The draft will be brought forward to council to the next meeting in September.
Thank you. I'll do my governance and intergovernmental report. Just a few things here. First of all, in the last couple of weeks, we saw 2 federal announcements that have an impact on our area. One was a $1.9 million to the Peterborough Police Services Board. This is a 3-year program to connect people who use drugs and experience mental health issues to connect to a newly created community-based outreach support service. This is much needed, and the Peterborough paramedics are one of the local parties that will be helping out on this agreement. The other one, very timely today, there's $763 million being transferred to the provincial government to assist with the safe return to school. Many of us are seeing either our kids or our grandkids or our neighbors' kids off to school over the next couple of weeks, and so that's there as well. Tomorrow, Peterborough Public Health, after a long journey, will be dealing with the new contract for septic inspections. That has changed in a couple of ways. I think the most important one for this council is that we are now a signature to that agreement as a township, and so that will come back to this council for review. And if you want to take a look at some of the proposals that are in there, it is being proposed. It still needs to get accepted for the use of a third-party review if you should choose to want to go on a discretionary inspection program. I also wanted to make note, Sherry and I had the opportunity on Friday, I guess it was, Sherry, right, to attend at Lang Pioneer Village. Our colleague, Dave Nelson, Reeve, for I think 38 years on council, for 40 plus years at Autonomy South Monaghan, passed away. And they had a really, I thought it was a very touching service where they drove through Lang Pioneer Village, which gave people an opportunity to pay their respects in a way that we could all physically distance, and to a place that Dave loved very dearly, and was a big proponent of that. His son led the procession on the big combine through, and I think Dave probably would have appreciated that. So it was a celebration of a life well lived, and one of a passing way too soon. So I know all my colleagues join me in expressing our condolences to his family and friends. Also, a couple weeks ago, I had an opportunity to host part of the visit for the Lieutenant Governor Her Honor, Ms. Doswell, who attended to our area and made a number of stops, and that was an interesting conversation. Donna touched on the transportation. That was brought up at AMO as well. And so we're hopeful that we'll hear positive news, as Donna pointed out. She also talked about our meeting with Parks Canada tomorrow. And we'll report back on that. Donna will certainly report back on that when we have finished or when that has been completed. So that completes my report. And so we'll now move on to other new and unfinished business. The first item, I think we need a resolution to establish a special meeting for September 29th at 3:30 to deal with the building and planning review, moved by Sherry, seconded by Donna. All those in favor? Okay, that is established. And we have there was a monthly update on the multimedia marketing campaign. Under other business, Angie, did you want to speak to that, or would there any? I'll let you speak to it first, and then I'll see if there's any questions. Okay, anybody have any questions? It's continuing to roll out as was intended, and quite a bit of activity there. Okay, is there any other items that anybody would like to bring up under new business? Not seeing any, we will go to a bylaw, the appointment bylaw of Chantal Simmons as our building inspector and bylaw enforcement officer, moved by Anita, seconded by Donna. All those in favor? That is carried. The confirming bylaw, Sherry and Donna. All those in favor, and a motion to adjourn from Jerry, seconded by Anita. All those in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you, colleagues, very much, and thanks to all the staff, for those who are here, as well as to those who were online. So thank you very much, and have a good evening. Stay safe and stay well.